Making sure everything. There we go. Okay, I think everything is good.
Yeah, and we're ready to start.
All right. Let us know if you can't hear us or anything. It says there's no sound.
Hmm.
Let me unmute again.
Yeah.
Making sure.
Oh yeah.
Oh, there
Okay,
it
here,
is.
yeah.
Okay,
There
I think
is-
so. We'll do the intro again.
Yes. Let's do the intro again. It's Saturday morning, and that means it's time to wake up
And smell the rosin. Your phone is talking now.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Now, okay. So we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay. All right. And so here's just a little show of our AI here, who likes to talk about the weather, and he really gets very freaked out when he sees himself. So, hey Vector, what's the weather like today?
86 degrees and cloudy.
Oh wow!
He went up onto the computer.
Okay, okay, there you go. Hey Vector, I have a question. What is the definition of a violin? I think he got confused. Let's try it again. Hey Vector, I have a question. What is the definition of a violin?
Definition of
Yeah,
Oh, you
he
moved
doesn't.
him.
Oh, he doesn't like
doesn't
it. Okay,
like it.
we're gonna try it next time. Okay, thank you, Vector. Now go to sleep.
Oh, I'm really
Yeah.
tired.
Okay, so we're gonna let. Oh, there you go. Okay, we're gonna let him rest. Well, thank you for filling in.
Okay, so we have sound.
We do.
Everyone's saying hi.
Hi
and
guys, thank you so much for comments. Thank you so much for showing up. This is just so much positivity for ourselves. I have to tell you, we started this just thinking of how, a lot of us, we're so used to having such structured lives, and with the pandemic, of course, the structure is something that is very hard to maintain, and the positivity. So our first thought was, why don't we do this every week? It will be like a party, getting together with my like-minded people, right, and talking, and you know what? Actually, I find myself looking forward to this, and my Saturdays always are so positive, so much fun, and the best part, I now always practice on Saturdays because I start off by sharing with you guys some of our practice tips, and I think it's the same. You feel the same way, don't you?
definitely. We have a comment from Alexander Canedo saying, mock audition is this coming Friday for me. Thanks for your help. I really appreciate it for the violin etudes.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. So glad this is helpful, and thank you for tuning in. So today we kind of have a really full agenda, right?
Yeah, we do. So, well, we had Vector do our intro.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to say a little bit about Bach, right?
We wanted, how a couple of episodes ago we showcased Sancan's new video, and then a couple of other things. So we always want to support you guys. If you have anything you would like us to showcase, and post the link in the description box, we would be very happy to do that. And today we thought of, I heard this really beautiful performance of a very famous movement from Bach's solo violin sonatas and partitas. It's one of my favorites. It's a saraband from the B minor partita, but it is performed on a vibraphone. And I don't know, I wanted to mention this because, of course, it's like meat and potatoes for the violins, right? It's like bread. I tell my students, the Bach's violin partitas and sonatas and partitas for violin solo are like violinist Bible. Like all my students, I tell them, because this is something that will teach you so much and will give you so much pleasure to play. The best part as a pedagogue, what I love about that book it's that, first of all, it's a solo, so you don't have to worry about having to also, try to rehearse with accompaniment. You can just kind of focus on the student. And the other thing, there is such a wide range of technical difficulty and challenge levels, I guess I would say, that it's you could find something for beginner, intermediate violinist, as well as for someone who's extremely advanced. So that's what I love about this book. But one of my favorite things also is that maybe if you're a violinist and cellist, of course, we both have those amazing books, right? But you might not know that a lot of other instrumentalists perform, at least I know, violin sonatas and partitas. And actually, I have a lot of friends on our channel. We do have this Bach with a sides twist where I recorded 3 of the movements, actually 6, from B minor partita, along with their doubles. We recorded Saraband on the harp, and while I'm playing the double on the violin, then we recorded other 2 movements. And so today we wanted to mention this new recording, and Essie, I'll let you talk about this.
As you mentioned before, it's a recording on vibraphone. So basically, you said everything there is to say.
No, I wanted you to talk about Blaze.
But as far as the person, Blaze is my boyfriend. He's a percussionist, and he has been playing a lot and teaching and doing different things during this weird pandemic time. He's also doing online classes, but he's been experimenting with YouTube, and he has a new channel. So if you guys could go give him some love, watch his video, give it a like, check out his channel, give it thumbs up, subscribe. I think you'll really enjoy his content, whether or not you're a percussionist. And I think for me, knowing him for the past few years, I think my rhythm has gotten better because anytime if there's a complicated rhythm, I ask for him to explain it to me. And since he's a percussionist, he's very good at that.
Yes.
And rhythm was not always my strong suit, but I think I'm a lot better at it now. So I think if you want to get better at rhythm too, then you should definitely tune in.
And I have to say, his particular interpretation of Saraband is absolutely gorgeous. I love it. So Blaze, if you're watching, kudos to you. You did a beautiful job. The vibraphone has such a dreamy sound, and I like how, if you notice, he phrases perfectly because he's taking enough time to let the sound kind of dissipate on its own. Because, of course, we're string players. We have the luxury of manipulating our sound any way we want, which sometimes we forget and we don't appreciate as much. I'm going to raise this because it keeps cutting my head up.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
I hope I didn't make you seasick by shaking that. But yeah. But so this is just, the timing is so beautiful. And I just really, really love that Saraband. And speaking of rhythm, I'm so glad you brought this point, because it wasn't very long ago that I understood that, it is true that if you take the symphony orchestra, the section that has the worst rhythm problems is usually the strings.
Yeah.
We are not the best.
Rushing.
Rushing, whatever. Yeah. And I think what I started realizing, what really helps me to be in control of my rhythms is, think more like a pianist or a percussionist. Because if you think a percussionist, they're usually in control of starting the sound. Once the sound is started on most of the percussion instruments, then whatever it does, they cannot affect, right? So you just have to let it be. So naturally, and I know from playing piano, I do the same thing when I play piano. Once I start a certain note, I don't have to think about it, because what matters is how I started. Once I started, the rest of that note is out of my control. And so I'm more concentrated on when is the proper time to start the next note, right? And I believe that is what helps if you're a string player and maybe sometimes you lag or sometimes you rush. Try thinking about rhythm in the way, instead of thinking, okay, here's the beginning of the note, here's the length of the note, here's the end, and then the next note starts or the next rest start. If you literally just think in your mind only about where the next note starts and just placing the next note at the right time, starting at the right time of the measure, a lot of times, especially in the orchestra playing, when you're not really have to be worried about like sound production as much because you're in the group, that helps so much. So anticipating making sure that the next note starts right when it's supposed to start, it solves so many rhythm problems for me. It's just incredible, and so I'm glad you brought it up. And I think that's one of the reasons why piano or percussion, if you think of them, they're so much better at conveying more difficult rhythms. And speaking of that, I think we have a couple of really nice focus tips, practice tips for today. So what's yours?
So for me, a really good focus tip that I have adapted is to use a timer when I practice. And this is something that I explored for the past few years in my undergraduate studies, but I really started doing it a lot more during my graduate degree this past 2 years, because I took a class on performance. I think it was called Performance Techniques. And basically it was kind of like a performance psychology class at Manhattan School of Music. So it was about like performance anxiety, practice habits, all those different things that affect the way you perform outside of the practice room. And one of the takeaways that I really enjoyed was that if you set a timer and have an oriented goal, your practice will be a lot more productive. And one of the reasons for that is that the human brain actually only can focus for about 15 to 20 minutes at a time.
Well, maybe yours.
Maybe less.
That's that long. I think
even less usually. Like you can only really maintain that good focus for that long. So what I do is I have a 20-minute timer, or sometimes 15 or even 10 minutes if you're having like a low focus day. Just pick like 2 measures and put on a 10-minute timer and work on those 2 measures or on that one spot that you need to work on, and say, okay, for this 10 minutes, I'm going to work on this spot only, and I'm going to work on this thing only. And then after you're done, you take a 5-10 minute break, and then you tackle the next thing. Or if you need to revisit whatever you just did, you can do that. But breaking up your practice into sections is so helpful. And I used to sometimes be like, okay, I'm going to set my timer for an hour and I'm just going to sit here and practice for an hour. But like a lot of that hour would be like sitting there, not doing anything, or like playing something else, or like scrolling through my phone. Another thing, setting your phone on airplane mode when you turn the timer on and putting it away. Or if you need the metronome, put it on airplane mode so you're not getting notifications.
That's a great tip. I should do that. I always forget that.
And then that way you're not going to be constantly distracted.
Especially when you're recording something and you're making such a good text, and then take, and then all these notification alarms. Definitely. Oh my goodness, that's a great tip.
Airplane mode. Also make sure Wi-Fi is off, because if you have an iPhone and you have airplane mode on, but you still have Wi-Fi on, you can still get like iMessages.
Really? I did not know that.
You can still get iMessages because those are over Wi-Fi technically, or like data or Wi-Fi. But you can get them over Wi-Fi. So just make sure you have airplane mode on and everything else off. But basically, so the sectional practice is really helpful for me, and I think it's helpful for a lot of people because it allows you to have really goal-oriented practice, really effective practice, and that's the best way to get things done when you're in the practice room. Otherwise, it feels a little aimless, and it feels a lot easier to approach the practice room if you know that, okay, today I have this, and this to work on, and I'm working on each thing for 30 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever you decide is a good amount of time for you. And then you know that you have that to do, and then once you're done, you can feel nice and accomplished, and you know that you got a lot of work done. And, I know some people who, they'll be like, oh, well, I practice, 8 hours a day, I stay in the practice room all day, but a lot of that time is sometimes just, sitting around or just repetitive practice that's not really practicing. Because really, I think you don't need more than, a few hours to really get everything you need done if you're focusing completely on everything.
And take breaks. I love that. Taking breaks. Especially guys on the stringed instruments. I know most of us have been doing it for so long. We take it for granted how twisted we have to be, especially on the violin. On cello, maybe it's a little bit less, but you guys have to exude a lot of force on the instrument. So that's not, maybe you don't twist as much as us, but you do. Like on the violin, basically it's more about precision, right? It's just getting the right angles, but you don't have to like put muscle to it. In fact, you don't want to. On the cello, maybe you're not quite as twisted as us, but you do have to, like your muscles are really working hard. So our bodies are so amazing. They get so used to, our muscles get used to it, especially if you started as a child, you're stretched right in the right places. We forget that how much wear it is on our muscles, on our bodies. So and I'm really guilty of not taking breaks, because sometimes I get so excited and the practice is going so well, I really hate to stop. But later, especially the older I get, I make it a point to take breaks. It's really, really good. And if you set an alarm, it helps too. Of course, if you're recording, don't do that. But if you're not recording and just at home practicing, yes, setting an alarm, remind yourself of taking a break before you're so exhausted that then you're worn out. That's a great tip.
Yeah, and I'm really guilty of that. Like, it was my freshman year / sophomore year of undergrad where. So, like, basically my freshman year, I came into undergrad and I was had super competitive mentality, which is not a bad thing, but it was, instead of using that in a positive way, I just practiced, like, all day, didn't take any breaks. I was like, I just gotta practice. I gotta practice all day, all night. And it's not a bad thing.
And sometimes, like, there's a stage in life sometimes that it actually works, because you're young and you're excited.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't last long.
But what I was saying is that I think it's possible to practice all day if you want to, but you have to take breaks. I was not taking breaks. I was just practicing. I'd play for like an entire hour and then sit there for 5 minutes and be like, okay, I'm going to play some more. And I'd play really grueling, difficult passages over and over, like lots of thumb position, lots of pressing. I would just do things over and over, and instead of feeling, and at the end of the practice, I was so exhausted every single time. And it's not bad to be exhausted, but it wasn't a good kind of exhaustion. It was a bad kind of exhaustion that made it really hard to practice the next day. I was sore in a lot of places because not only was I not taking breaks, but I was also playing with a lot of tension, which I had to, fix later. But that resulted, all of that practicing without taking breaks resulted in me having an injury in my left arm my sophomore year that I had to take a break from playing for I wasn't really playing at full capacity for like a month or two because I worked these muscles so hard. It wasn't tendonitis, but what I did was I actually like inflamed something in here that was pressing on my nerve. Ooh. And that made my fingers tingle. And that's actually a pretty common injury for cellists because we're like this all the time. And violinists too, because your arm is bent so much. Yeah. And sometimes if you're not conscious of that and you don't stretch your arm out enough, you can develop something like that. Or what I was doing is I was playing with a low arm like this and putting lots of stress on these muscles. So it's really important to have a nice angle in your left arm when you're playing the cello. And I'm sure there's certain angles that you need to have as you're playing the violin or the viola or the bass as well.
It's all about the angles. That's all I'm learning. Like, the more I practice, the more things I learn, the more I understand. It's all about letting your body understand what it is that you wanted to do and to find the proper angles. At least on the violin, I know that's where, and I actually see myself, when I watch myself, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, and now I can see how I progress, like very gradually my body keeps changing angles just a little bit, to adapt to the stress and to be more efficient. Yeah. Ergonomic, if you say. That's...
Yeah. So, and I mean, I think what Dr. Seitz said is right. There is a time and place for practicing a lot, and I'm not saying don't practice. That's definitely not what I'm saying. You can practice as much as you want, but you need to take breaks and listen to your body. If your body is hurting or if your body is tired, that means maybe you need to stop. Maybe you need to take a break. And, I think sometimes practicing 8 hours a day or being in the practice room all day is glorified in the classical music world, which is not a bad thing all the time, but sometimes I think all of our bodies and all of our minds are different, and we need different things for our practice time. So we need to be really careful to make sure we're doing what's right for us. And you can consult your teachers about that, your orchestra directors, and experiment with things and see what works for you. So, and that doesn't mean don't practice, but find what works best for you. I found for me that about 4 to 5 hours is usually the cap for the day. After that, I'm not really very productive anymore. My brain just kind of goes out the window and I'm tired. So for me, anything after that isn't super productive.
And one thing, they say never, but there are two things that my teachers always told me. Never practice when you have a fever, and never play through pain. If you can help.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're on stage in the middle of a concerto and something hurts, but other than that, those two things, because when you have a fever, it's very easy to misjudge completely how much, work you're introducing to your muscles. It's very easy to overwork and hurt yourself if you have a fever, because you have a very different way of feeling everything. And then if you feel pain, never ever practice through pain. Just stop, let it go, let it subside, and then so those were awesome tips, Esty.
We have a couple of
great
questions.
Yes.
So first, Josh asked if he said, didn't you used to have an app that helped with the setting break times? I think he's talking about Pomodoro, right?
Yeah. It is a really fun app. And of course, I used it when it was called the Pomodoro app, which means tomato in Italian. But I think it's called a focus timer, and it's a really nice one. So I haven't used it for a while, because now they have a lot of different ones. But that one I highly recommend to my students, and they were using for a while. And by the way, if you're a teacher, it might be a fun way for your students to. I'll see. If it still is there, we will post the link. We can post the app link, right? But my favorite feature of it was that not only you can set it where it will ring for you to take a break, and then it will ring when the break is over and to start again. But you can track your practice by topics. So whenever you start each session, you could call it by, for example, if this is scale, you call it a scale, or like a Hachatourian concerto. And then the best part, it creates this journal log of your practicing. And so it has it by just dates, but my favorite part, it has by topics. And so you could go, for example, to the last week and see how much time you spent just practicing scales that week, how much time you spent practicing etudes, how much time you spent. It's amazing. And I remember it was a couple of years ago when I used it. I had to learn Hachatourian concerto and memorize it in 1 month, which I don't know if you've ever played Hachatourian violin concerto. It's my favorite, but it is very repetitive and very long. So I remember it was so helpful, because I could see exactly how long it took me to memorize like so much music, and then it helped me to be much more productive. And actually, for a year or so, for a couple of semesters, I did that with my students, where I told them anytime they practice, they were supposed to name the topic of that timing of that section, like scales, and then they would bring in the log, and we'll see if they practice the scales. Like, suppose I say, well, this week you have to practice your scale at least 20 minutes every day, and so every time they practice the scale, they would name the alarm of the scales, and then we would see the graph. It was really, really fun. So if it's still working, we'll make sure and put the link in the description, right?
Yeah, okay. For sure. And then we have another question from CBDR52. Since I was young, I was always told practice makes perfect, but now as an adult, I realize that practice makes permanent. Can you guys speak to your experience with this?
Wow, this is a great question. Thank you so much. I think the most important part of practice is how you use repetition. We all know, and I think that's the sequence of events. So we all know that saying that repetition is the mother of learning, and that I'm not saying it's not true, it's true, but you have to know when to repeat. So I think the most important thing that I've learned from years of practice is that there are kind of a couple of stages to practice. First, when you get a new piece of music and it's completely unfamiliar, it always feels hard. You have to figure things out. So that's when you don't want to just repeat, right? I've seen, and I've done it myself when I was young, something harder, just kind of instinctively just play through it a million times, and it's almost like you're hoping, well, if I played a bazillion times, all of a sudden somehow it'll work itself out. It could if you're very talented, but it will take so long. So that's why what we do, if you notice, your teachers always tell you, slow down and break things into small pieces. Why do we do that? It is because we want to get to the point where the smaller the chunk of the piece is and the slower it is, the more likely we can actually play it right. And so once you broke it down, that passage that is very fast, maybe very long and very complicated, if you broke it down to a chunk where that chunk you can figure out how to play correctly, even if it's like a snail tempo, okay? But you can play it correctly, and that, you know, then that's when you repeat. Then you take that chunk, and in that tempo and at that size that you're able to play it correctly, you repeat then. And so you put your repeats after figuring out how to play something correctly. And so instead of just repeating things over and over, playing through while you are not able to play it well, then you take the repetition, which is the mother of learning. I totally believe that, but you have to put it after. First you figure out how small and how slow you can go so that you can actually play the way you want it to be. Then you repeat, and that way, and it's true, and that true, the practice makes permanent. I totally believe in it, because when you repeat, your brain is not moral. It doesn't know what's right, what's wrong. It just knows what you repeat, you know. So the more you repeat something, the more it gives it back to you. It thinks, oh, that's what you like, so here. So imagine when you're playing something that's very complex and very fast, and you keep obviously making mistakes, that's what becomes permanent in your brain, because your brain is actually making little pathways to make those movements easier, right? And so, yeah, that's a great question. So I do believe that practice makes permanent in the way that whatever you repeat the most, that's what you're going to have out there. So, yeah, that's a great question. I hope that helped. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Do you have any, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said. I think it's really important to make those pathways correctly the first time. One of the things, I studied with Hans Jensen for a little bit at Meadowmount during his summer, and one of the things he did with us was make us play. We were literally not allowed to play our etudes faster than we could play them at the time. Like, he would literally start us at like 40. If 40 BPM was like where you could play it perfectly through. If you had to be at like quarter note equals 10, like if that's the speed you could play it through perfectly without making mistakes, giving your brain enough time to process, that's what he wanted us to do. And it was kind of an experiment for us to see how well and how quickly we could learn an etude if we started from the very beginning without making silly mistakes just because we're trying to rush through everything. So that was like a half cello, half violin thing. I don't know what I just did. Yeah. But
I'm rubbing off on you.
That's basically, so yeah, I agree, I think. And try that. It's a fun experiment. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with how much quicker how much more quickly you learn things if you break it into smaller chunks and, use timers and play it at a tempo that you can play cleanly and in tune.
Yes. So you're setting goals for yourselves that are reachable, right? So
exactly.
Because as an educator, I always like to think of there two types of goals. There are some very high level learning goals. It's like getting a beautiful bow arm. That takes years, and it's like a child growing. Sometimes you can't notice that you made progress right away. But of course, that's an important goal. But if that's the only thing you're thinking of, goals that take years to see the results, it's very discouraging to practice. So that's why it's so important to set goals that are achievable. And then, for example, even memorizing a page of music, that's very achievable. You can do it. Or maybe memorizing. That's why I love memorization, because you can set a goal. Okay, I want to memorize these 3 lines, and then you could do it. And in a half an hour, you will feel so accomplished. I always have memorization goals for my students, because I feel it's one of those goals that, while we're still working on these very goals that we've set up and other things like quality of your sound, that takes takes a while to achieve, and sometimes you get discouraged because you can't see the results right away. But these kind of goals are important to include, because that is what makes you feel, no, I am making a progress. Yes, and that will keep you motivated.
Short-term and long-term goals.
Yeah,
and recording yourself, because it's really nice when you have a recent recording of a piece you've been working on for a while, and you have an old recording from when you first started, and it's really great encouragement to hear how you improve throughout the years and through the months and however long you've been working on the piece. But anyway, do you want to move on to
so speaking of short-term goals, why don't we work on an A major right now? That's actually the whole purpose of scales, right? So speaking of achievable, attainable goals, you know, it's basically you take an A major. It's hard to say that, well, today I'm going to learn how to play in tune everything that was ever written for a violin, right? But you can take a scale, an A major, and say, well, I'm going to improve my intonation on A major. And one of the best things to do that is to kind of know the pattern of fingerings for scales. In my studio, I always require my students to play scales from memory after a first lesson, you know, because I feel like memorizing the finger patterns for scales is what really makes your brain become very, very comfortable, especially when it comes to sight reading, because most of the time the music that we deal with is okay, I always forget where to start. Western European classical tonal system, right? And so
that's a tongue twister.
Yeah, I know. And so when you deal with music like that, especially in sight reading, knowing your scales, knowing finger patterns that are right there, you know, at your fingertips, literally speaking, no pun intended. So this is what helps you to really. This is one of those short-term goals that is quite attainable and quite fun to see your own progress. And so so we're gonna start with that. Here's you have an 8. Let's see. Make sure let's
take
synchronize.
I just wanted to be sure the mic was still working, but it looks like everything is
good. Yeah. So we're gonna start. I'm gonna start today. So we're just gonna do 3-octave A major scale, and then.
Do you want to talk about fingerings?
Yeah. Why don't you start with your fingerings?
Okay. So for this is a little different than the other 3 scales that I've done during the past episodes. So in A major we have 3 sharps: F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. So I start on the A right here on the G string. That's the lowest A we have. So you start in an extended position. You have to extend for the G sharp. And here's where it's different. I don't play 1, 3, 4. I play 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So it's just like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, but instead of it's 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, because 2 is a bit of a stretch. So it's kind of like doing our normal 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 pattern, but just a little lower. And for me, this is the fingering that I like for this scale.
And we're gonna put the link to the scale with fingerings. Yeah. Great. So I'm gonna go over. I have a couple of fingerings for 3-octave A major scale. It depends on what you feel more comfortable shifting where. So obviously on A string, shifting to the 3rd position. So here's where it gets different. So the most common fingering would be. So basically from the 3rd position, you're going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, and on the E, 1 more shift to E. Then on the way back, you only have 1 shift to the 4th finger to the 3rd position. Right, so this is the first type, the most common one. But I also like to do it sometimes, depending on my mood and the musical context which I am in. I like to do it a little differently. So this will be the same, but I'm going to go to C sharp. And then I only have 1 shift. And this way I get to the G on the 1st finger. And then I just have to use my pinky twice. And then go the same way back. Only 1 shift down to C sharp. Yeah. So I will write it out and post a link with both of the fingerings for you guys later in the comments, or what is it called? No, description box. That's what it's called. Yeah. So let's do it. I'm going to start this time because you always start. So we're going to do it together again. 2 per bow. Oh, by the way, are you guys ready? Here's an A just in case. Yeah. Let's try it together. So 2 per bow. 1, 2, ready, go. Fun. I love thirds, right? So, if you guys have any questions, do we have any questions?
No.
Okay, good. So, what did you want to show? Any fingerings or any? Oh, you already did. Any bowings?
I'm actually going to talk about tone production in the upper register. This was a question we had in the comments last week. So, a lot of these scales ascend up into the upper register if you do 3 octaves or 4 octaves. Some of the 4 octave ones are when you start on the C string. For A major, usually 3 octaves is good enough. If you're feeling really like you want to go all the way up here, you can. If you're playing poppers, elfantants, that's a good idea to do up here. It's a crazy piece where you're playing literally like off the fingerboard. There's a really great recording of Rostropovich playing it, so if you find that, it's like insanely fast and awesome. But anyway, I digress. So the biggest key to have a nice tone when you're playing in the upper register is 1, to move your bow closer to the bridge as your hand moves down the fingerboard. And when I say closer to the bridge, I don't mean you don't want to get right on top of it as if you were playing Ponticello. You don't want, that's not the kind of sound we want. But you can experiment with exactly how close you can get to the bridge without getting that Ponticello sound. So for me, if I'm playing, and it's different if you're playing an open string versus whether you're playing a higher note. So for instance, if you just hold a D on the A string up here, and then you experiment. So I can get pretty close before it starts to get that nasty kind of grating sound, which sometimes you do have to use, which by the way, fun fact, if you ever see something that says sul pont in a piece, it means to play at Ponticello, which means to play it almost on the bridge. So you get that sound, which is kind of a cool effect, especially in an orchestra when you have a lot of people doing it at once. But that's not what we want for this. So, but not only do you want to get closer to the bridge, but you also have to lighten the weight in your right arm and use more bow and a quicker bow. So you want to glide more as you go further up the string. So for instance, down here, my weight is going to be a lot more concentrated because the string is very thick and I need to make it respond with my bow. But even as I'm going up to the A string, I lighten my bow a little bit because if I use the same pressure that I use here on the A string, it's too harsh. It doesn't sound good. It sounds like, I don't know, like a weird duck or something. Like, it just doesn't sound good. So lighten the pressure a bit. Into that open A, lighten the pressure as you change from the G sharp to the open A to blend the sound so it doesn't sound like you're just popping out of nowhere. Closer to the bridge. So here I'm very close to the bridge and I'm using a lot of bow and I have light weight. And you don't vibrate when you're playing scales, but I'm vibrating for the sake of the tone. Get a really nice tone there. Even if you're not vibrating, it sounds nice. Versus too much weight. Yeah, sorry to everyone's ears, but it's for the greater good. So if you want to try that, you can find that A with me. It's the very top A of the scale. It's a harmonic, but I want you to press it as a normal note. And we're just going to try a couple of bows like that. And feel free to experiment during this time with how close you can get, how far you can get. If it sounds ugly, that's okay. If it doesn't sound the way you want, that's okay. That's what practice is for. We check our egos at the door. So let's just try a little bit. You can vibrate if you want or not. And every cello has a different sweet spot. You'll find the sweet spot for yours, just like I've found the sweet spot for mine after having it for a few years. And this was actually a brand new instrument. I'm its first owner. Right after it was made, I'm the first one to own it. And so it's even still changing. So your sweet spot might change too as your instrument matures and grows with you. But yeah, so those are the main points. Just don't be afraid to experiment and try to play around with how close you can get to the bridge and how much weight you actually need to have in your arm to get the sound you want.
Very good. Great job. So, I like the point you made at the end, experiment. And remember, when it comes to the sound, what you're really developing the most is your ears, how you hear. So, I know we have an artist in the family, Josh, my son, and I remember when he just started, I started taking him to art lessons and I knew nothing about art. And I asked him, well, what it is that you think you're learning the most during your art lessons? And I will never forget his answer because he said, Mom, I learned how to see things. And I developed the vision, like the way I see, my eyes, that's what, and I tell to my students always that this is the most important thing that when you're practicing, the most important thing that you're doing and that you're learning how to hear, you're developing your ears. So your ears basically have to become your eyes. And when you're talking about the sound, that's the most important thing, is learning how to hear whether you like this sound or not. Learning how to hear, like when you go on YouTube, just compare different people playing different things or the same piece and just deliberately listen to the kind of sound they're making and pick which one's your favorite. There's like no right or wrong. There's so many amazing violinists and cellists out there, but a lot of them have a very distinctive sound, and some of them you might like more than others. And try to think, what am I hearing? Do I really like this kind of sound? Is this the kind of sound that I would like to achieve eventually or move toward? And so that's what the most important thing is about learning how to play sound. Well, so today we're gonna talk a little bit more about the shifts. Last week I showed you the basic shifts where we talked about how to properly release, right? And so I'm going to be a little closer this time so you can see my hand a little better. So that what's important that you're releasing before you slide, right before, and that creates a very smooth shift. You could go very fast and still be very smooth in your shift movement. And the best part, it really does a great job of making the slide not quite as prominent. So you're not afraid to move smoothly just because it's going to sound a little bit too slidey. So that's very important. Hopefully, if you had a chance to practice that release, that's great. If not, I would say check out our last week's episode if you're starting to work on your shifts. So today I'm going to talk about the other type of the shift, and it's more complex because in this case you're shifting from one finger, like an A major, and then back. So not only we're changing positions, but we're also changing fingers. And there is this rule that I think it's pretty universal rule, because my teachers in Russia, my teachers in the U.S., European teachers that I heard, most of the time the school of thought is that the basic shifting technique in this case is that, so if we're shifting from the second finger in the first position, so that we call that the old finger. So the last finger in the old position, that is the old finger. And then, so when we got to the new position, the finger that we landed to in the new position, we call it the new finger. And so you always lead with the old finger. And only once you're in that new position, then you will lift or drop the new finger, right? So that creates this one little note that I like. I don't know the exact translation of the Russian term into English, so I call it the ghost note. So basically we sort of are adding an extra note to that shift that doesn't exist. So if you have the shift, you hear C sharp, yeah. But technically what I'm doing, and I deliberately made it audible, when I practice that shift, I would go to the third position with the second finger and make sure I reach that E natural that the second finger would play in the third position first, because that is what helps my arm to measure the distance and really know how far I'm coming from first to third position. You see that? The first movement is to bring your whole system into the third position. So your forearm from here, the first position to the third. You see, that's what I did. So I eliminated the change of fingers at first so that my body knows first where the position is. Once I land in the third position, then I can play the new note. If I were going from C sharp to F sharp, I would do, right, and so forth. So in this case, I like to compare shifts to airplanes. And I always think of my arm as an airplane and fingers as passengers. So in this case, we're going to land the airplane in the third position. And then we'll let our passengers to change seats, so to speak. So the arm goes first and then the passengers. Now, I'm not saying, of course, once you start playing real music, there are a lot of different ways to execute these shifts depending on your artistic and musical goals. So that doesn't mean that this is the only way you will be shifting in these kind of shifts, but this is the best way to teach a student at the beginning how to produce that shift correctly, how to execute it correctly. And also I would have to say it is still my favorite way of shifting. I feel like it gives me the most secure feeling when I shift, and I always practice all of these shifts that are also changing the fingers in the position this way. A couple of more tips. So my teachers always told me to reverse the shift when I practice. So if I'm practicing going up, then reverse the shift and go down. But in this case, now your first finger is the old note, so you're going to lead with the first finger down. Yeah, and so basically now you can practice this shift. You want to try? So here's my C sharp. So we're going to slur. We're going to use half of the C for that ghost note that doesn't really exist. And then on the new bow, we're going to play the new note that does exist. And then we'll do it backwards. Let's do it. Ready? Go. C sharp to the third position on E. And now play the new note that we're actually going to, D. And now we're going to reverse that. D down to the first position and C sharp. So the old finger goes to the new position. Notice I also used the bow for the old note. This is very important. The timing of the bowing is also important because let me show you the difference. So here's once I shorten my ghost note. So basically what you do then, you start changing the rhythm to a dotted rhythm. The bow distribution, you use the most length of the old note for the real note, and then you shift at the very end of your bow and at the very end of the value of the note, right? So by doing that and pushing that closer and closer to the end, you end up kind of not playing the ghost note. You see that, so that's what you want. So you're basically just pushing that to the very end. And don't ever be afraid of people hearing the shifts. I always tell my students, we don't have to always hide the shifts. In fact, I believe that hearing the shift makes us more like a human voice, because human voice tends to connect the notes. You know, if you're going ah, unless you're saying vowels, ta, consonants, ta, ta, then you disconnect them. But if you're singing on a vowel, your voice tends to connect to glide from one note to the other. So I think that use of kind of shifts is very important in violin playing, because that's what makes us sound more like a human voice, and in phrasing too. But of course you want to be able to produce the shifts that are very accurate and clean, and that's the best way to do it, in case what you have, you're also changing fingers on top of changing positions. And so that the final tip, when you have to, so here's, if I start shift on the new bow instead of the old bow, you see how big the slide became. So that's basically, sometimes if you're playing like Czardas or Zagojne-Weisen, and you want, for the artistic effect, you want to produce a very noticeable slide, then you actually delay the shift and you shift on a new bow. But this is kind of, you use it as jalapenos, you know, in your food. You don't want to put too much, because then it's not edible. Like that guy with Takis, you know, we just saw on TikTok. Oh, he stuffed the jalapeno with cream cheese and Takis, and then he ate it, and he was like crazy, totally. And then he rubbed his eyes after that. Yeah, so that was like that's a ridiculous TikTok. Anyway, so you don't want to use the slides too much, because then you end up with Takis in the jalapeno. It's not a good idea. But you know, when you do want to slide, that's the best way to produce it, is to actually delay and slide in the timing of the new note rather than the old note, and also the new bow rather than old bow. But sliding on the old bow and shifting at the end of the old note with the old finger, it always produces the cleanest and most classical kind of type of a shift. So I hope that helped. And yes,
we have one more exciting segment for you.
Yes, and thank you, Fossum Middle School, for this really fun topic. I was asked to talk a little bit about Kamorovsky, and so Esther is preparing something for us, and his etudes. That was just that name, you know. I haven't heard that name in so long, and it was such a nostalgia when I heard the name. So what you see right now on the screen is a little etude by the composer and Russian violinist who lived in Soviet times. His name was Kamorovsky, and he wrote a lot of literature for violin, pedagogy, methodical literature, I guess I would say. He had a very interesting life. His name actually comes from the word, the root of the word that is in his name, I don't know how to say it right, comes from the Russian word kamar, which means a mosquito. So so Kamorovsky basically means of the mosquito. So I don't know why he has a name like that, but he was born in Moscow in 1909, and he passed away in 1955. So that gives you kind of an era. So he was very classic example of a Soviet composer and musician, and he wrote a lot of literature actually for kids. So when I was learning violin, I played a lot of his etudes, and so he worked in a lot of theaters in Moscow, and he wrote a lot of music for theater. He also was administrator for the traveling theater groups. And so his life is very, very interesting. So if you want to Google and read a little bit more about him. But the way I know this name is from my childhood, from playing all these really fun etudes. I actually found in my books this book by him that is actually a book of etudes, and it has 38 etudes. They start with very, very beginner etudes. They're all in the first position, and they progress in difficulty, both in the left hand and the bow arm. So today I thought I would play this etude for you, and you guys can play along with me, but let me explain it to you a little bit. Is there any way for me to show first?
They're showing. They can see you in the corner.
Oh, you can see me? Oh, I had no idea. Okay, that's great. Okay,
can
wonderful. So if you guys can see me, that's fantastic, because what I wanted to show you is the most important part of this etude is bow distribution. And if you can see the little Russian writing at the top, what it explains what is the main goal of the etude is, and it says, so it's important to have a nice good accent on the longer notes, that is accented on the eighth notes, and then make sure to execute the short notes with the softly, with the very softly meaning in the sound volume, but also meaning with a very soft movement in the wrist. So at the beginning, so basically the student would have to go right. So, and depending on the tempo, if you are starting a student, or yourself, if you want to practice that nice, bow distribution exercise, or that making sure that you can produce really nice tone all over your bow, it's good to play that actually slowly, because it lets you control the whole bow, and then very top, then very bottom. But of course, when you play it faster, you really can't use all of the bow, so you can move it up maybe to the top part of the bow. Or you could do it here. You want to torture your students. If you're really angry at your student and you want to give them a real torture during the week's practice, make them do it at the bottom of the bow. They will really hate you, but it will help them. So I was thinking, why not read it together, right? It's such a cute etude. I think what I would like to do after this, I will translate the Russian writing, and I will, maybe post it somewhere, so you guys could, if you wanted to use it, you're welcome to use it. We'll post a link to that. But right now, let's try to play together. It has two sharps, which means it could be either D major or B minor. In this case, it is B minor, and it's just very cute, has a very cute melody to it, and it reminds me of my childhood. So let's try slowly, and let's see if you can do that bow distribution where on the eighth notes you use all of the bow, and then that means you will be using your arm. And then at the top or at the bottom, when you're playing short 16th notes, you use just basically the wrist movement here or here, right? And so I want you to really concentrate on how different that feels. And actually, the reason this exercise is so important, because much later in life, when I was getting more into chamber music playing, sonatas and quartets, I realized that a lot of phrasing has to do with knowing when to use your arm and when to use only the wrist, or which part, because that's what helps you control bow distribution the most. And technically, if you think of when you're trying to convey a phrase, it's usually conveyed by your articulation and the bow speed. And so this way, you're very, very good at controlling your bow speed and knowing that when you want a lot of bow speed, you usually use all of your arm. When you want less bow speed, you can just use wrist and fingers. So let's try it. Here's my B. So we're in B minor, and we're gonna go pretty slowly. So one and two and. less bow, and then gradually more. Bravi tutti. I hope you played along with me. Sorry about a couple of mishaps, but this is a live thing. That's the beauty of playing live. I really enjoyed I remember as a kid playing this, and I really loved minor things. One of the things that I loved about this etude is that it's, come on in, Esther, that it's in minor. And I was like, I thought, I'll be honest with you, this is, I'm confessing this, I can't believe I'm confessing to this on the air, but when I was in elementary school, I thought Mozart was the most boring composer because most of the things that I knew by him were written in major. So I'm kind of a drama queen and always have been when it came to music. But one of the reasons I still remember this etude because it was so much fun to play something dramatic in minor. So I hope you guys enjoyed this etude, and let me know if you would like any more fun etudes by some obscure Russian Soviet composers. I'll be happy to oblige.
Yeah, and thank you so much for tuning in with us today. And as usual, let us know if you have any topics that you would like us to cover. So far, we've had someone suggest something every week, so it's been really great to have that inspiration. Let us know what you guys would be interested in. I was thinking of maybe even one of these days doing some, like, showing some different stretching exercises that are good things you could do in the practice room for when you take a break. Different things like that. So it doesn't even have to always be playing related. If you have something that's related to, you know, just to practicing or performing, we can also talk about that too. And as usual, if you like our content, we definitely want you to subscribe to our channel and like our videos so you see more of us and more of content like us. Yes. So we would really appreciate that. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers.
Yes, we're at 706. We were this morning, so hopefully we get to 777 soon.
Yes, and we've been doing, so if we get to 1,000, we're going to do a Pizza and Piazzolla live party on YouTube. And, well, there's just a couple days left in September, but if you guys really pull it together, I will eat a piece of pineapple pizza on the party on the air, which I don't like because I've never actually tried it. So I mean, I guess I can't really say it because I haven't tried it. But if we get to 1,000 before October 1st, then I will do that. If not, then I will not be doing that.
Yeah, but we'll still have a party.
We'll still have a party regardless of when we get to 1,000. But anyways, thank you so much, everybody.
Guys. Really, also shout out to Michael Fossum, Middle School channel, for requesting Kamorovsky. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Let us know if you have anything else. And to Josh for a great question. And to CBR52 for an awesome question about the practicing. I hope this helped.
And I think Sankan also recommended a book. She said earlier, Practicing with Purpose is a great book by David Kish. So if you guys want to look into that.
Yeah, well, I will definitely look into that too. And I think that's good for today. That's a wrap.
Okay.
All right. Have fun.
Bye.
Bye.